Now that I already have installed a lock to the display cabinet, the next I want to do is to install a locking arm hardware to keep the cabinet door open. This is the locking arm hardware I bought, and I could install it there. If I install it like that, folding it in the same way I fold the hinges, it will hit this strip, and if I move it so that it does not hit the strip, I won't be able to open the window to be vertical. I think it is better to make it fold to the opposite direction. Like that I could install it there. But because I want to get complicated, I will install it there. So I will use this router bit, a bit thicker than the locking arm hardware. And I will route a groove there, and another groove there. So when I close the window, the locking arm hardware will stuff into those grooves. I need to calculate this distance, L, and it depends on the locking arm hardware length. The separation between the holes is 13 centimeters. Then I have that right angle triangle. Both sides are the same length, and the diagonal is 13 centimeters. And the Pythagoras theorem says that the square of one side plus the square of the other side is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. And because both sides are the same length, the square of L is 84.5. So L is, more or less, 9.2 centimeters. Later we will see that I need to make those grooves longer. So the locking arm hardware will fold like that. I make a mark 9.2 centimeters from the edge. And with the hole on the mark, I mark some millimeters more to each side. I want the inside edge of the groove to be at 20 millimeters from the edge of the window. And because the window protrudes 6 millimeters all around the cabinet structure, there I make the mark at 20 minus 6 is equal to 14 millimeters from the edge. Now I can take the window apart. With this router bit I cannot route a groove deep enough, so I dismantle this big bearing, and I will install there two smaller bearings that I take from these cheap router bits. With those bearings I can route deeper grooves, so I don't have to put the screws too near the edge of the strips. I installed two bearings because I hope that will distribute the pressure, so they will not make a big mark on the surface of this soft wood. I installed the router bit in my router, in such a way that the part of the cutting edge that is near the bearings is at 2 centimeters from the router base. With the window hanging in one side of my workbench, I only need one spring clamp to hold it. I don't like to route while I squat, but I need to see the marks between which I want to route. I don't feel comfortable routing like that, so I am very careful. I route the groove in several passes until the last pass, with the bearings touching the wood. When I finish routing, I remain looking to the groove. So that is what happened. I grazed the wood while the router bit was still spinning. I think with some sanding and some wood paste I can fix it. Now I will route the groove in the cabinet structure. I make the mark at 14 millimeters. I adjust the cutting edge to that mark, and I will route between the marks I made when I marked in the wood some millimeters beyond the length of the locking arm hardware. The second mark from the right is the 9.2 cm mark. It is difficult to see the marks while I route, but it is not a problem if I route some more than what I should. And this time I will wait until the router bit stops spinning before I move the router away. When I measure, I didn't subtract the groove depth. On account of this, if I install it there, I need to screw it far from the 9.2 cm mark, so I will route this groove longer. When I wrote it in the window, I wrote it a longer groove. So now in the window I don't need to make the groove longer. So with the window in place, the locking arm hardware goes there. I mark in the window the distance where I want to put the screw from the corner. I measure how deep it has to be, more or less 7 mm. And I mark 7 mm in the edge of the window. I will use that bit to drill a hole from the edge of the window to the inside of the groove. That is the bit I need to drill a guide hole, but these screws have that thick chunk, so I will use a thicker bit to counterbore 4 or 5 mm, because I don't want the screw to splint the wood. If I want the locking arm hardware to be horizontal inside the grooves when I close the window, both screws must be at the same distance from the hinge of the window. If the second screw is also at 7 mm from the top of the groove, I think the metal sheets of the locking arm hardware will not bump into the screws. I use fine grit sandpaper to delete the pencil marks. Maybe I could use a rubber, but I also have to sand the wood paste I have applied in the corner of the strip. And the truth is that I still have to dismantle this display cabinet, to sand it and to apply a second coat of varnish. I can put the first screw. And I put in that end of the locking arm hardware. It is a bit rigid, but I will put the second screw to see how it works. Well, I can close the window, but when I close the window, the locking arm hardware moves to one side, and I have to push it so that it goes inside the grooves. There it is too loose, and there the locking arm touches the bottom of the groove. And now I have another problem. The hinges are too loose. We can watch here they have a slot to accommodate one screw, and they also have a very small screw to open the base of the cylinder, to tighten it against the wood, but I don't have a screwdriver that small, so I will insert there one screw, to tighten the hinges and to make sure they don't move. There is even a bevel to accommodate the head of the screw. I don't want the locking arm to be that loose, so I will put one of these thick washers in the outside, between the locking arm hardware and the wood. But first I will rasp the bottom of the groove, so that the wood doesn't grip the metal. Now I put in the first washer. Then I put in the locking arm hardware. And now the screw. And I do the same in the other groove. That is how the locking arm hardware locks. And that is how to unlock it. Now I can close the window. And we can see how the locking arm hardware gets into the grooves, but I think it wraps just a bit one side of the groove in the window. Thanks for watching. You can find all my woodworking videos in my YouTube channel. And if you like my videos, remember that you can subscribe to my channel.